Welcome to yet another episode of Game of Thrones Abridged on Alt Swift X. Today we are reading Arya 3, A Game of Thrones, the third Arya chapter. And today we're indulging in that greatest of sports, the gentleman's pastime, cat catching. Arya Stark, as part of her training under Syrio Forel, has been chasing cats, catching cats as a way of training her agility and her sneakiness and her speed and her senses, basically kick-starting her training as a ninja assassin, more or less. And so Syrio has had her running around the castle chasing cats. In particular, she's hunting after a one-eared black tom, a particular tomcat, which is renowned in the Red Keep as being an especially nasty old cat. In fact, there is a theory that this particular cat is the same cat that is mentioned as the black cat of Rhaenys Targaryen, the young daughter of Rhaegar Targaryen, a cat called Balerion, named after a big black dragon. So it's possible that this cat Arya is chasing actually has quite a long history. In fact, certain esteemed theorists in the community have theorized further that this black tomcat might be the father cat, the daddy cat, of Sir Pounce and Tommen's other kittens. So just if you ever thought that Game of Thrones didn't have depth and complexity, just know that cat genealogy, cat parentage, is part of this story. So Arya's chasing cats, and she's repeating to herself all these sort of mantras that Syrio Forel has given her. Quiet as a shadow, light as a feather, slippery as an eel, and all these other ones. Quick as a snake. So these are the sorts of values and skills that Syrio is trying to teach Arya. Skills and values that help Arya out very much in her later travels. But it's not easy. Catching cats is hard. Arya's getting all these scratches and cuts and scabs all over her body from all the running and falling and rolling around. And so Arya's getting a bit banged up, but she persists through it, because one of Arya's great qualities is her persistence and her dedication to trying to improve her abilities. And so she begins to do that in this chapter. And Syrio is a pretty hard taskmaster, just constantly pushing her to keep trying and keep trying harder, and Arya is very willing to keep trying harder. And so Arya's chasing this particular black tomcat, this particular infamous, notorious, it's the notorious CAT is what this tomcat is. And Arya is chasing the cat. There's actually kind of a cat beef in the Red Keep, isn't there? Because we know that Tommen mentions that Sir Pounce has a bit of a tiff, has a bit of an ongoing fight with the notorious CAT, the Black Tomcat. I wonder if that's almost an East Coast, West Coast thing between father and son. It's like a Star Wars version of... Yeah, that's amazing. Anyway, so they're chasing the black tomcat, and Arya almost has it. Arya almost has this one cat that has been her goal for for a whole bunch of time, is to find this particular cat, and she's been trying, and finally she corners this cat down a corridor, and she succeeds in grabbing it. She grabs the nasty black tomcat, hugs it to her chest, and kisses him right between his eyes, quicker than he can swat her back. So Arya finally succeeds in grabbing the cat, but then she hears voices behind her, turns around, all of a sudden, in the Red Keep, she sees Tommen Baratheon and Myrcella Baratheon, the little prince and princess, standing behind her. Along with a scepter and a few guards. And Tommen and Myrcella, they're all perfectly dressed up like a good little prince and princess. Myrcella is dressed up pretty as a doll, and Tommen is a plump little blonde boy with a prancing stag sewn in pearls across the front of his doublet. Meanwhile, Arya looks filthy and ragged and scarred, and they mistake her for a boy. They call her a ragged, dirty, smelly boy, and they giggle at him. And the guards sort of comment on Arya as well and say, "Oh, can't keep this sword out. It's like trying to keep out rats." And so they sort of accost Arya. And they are very demeaning towards Arya. We're very much reminded of the sort of shitty class system in Westeros, where the princes and princesses feel they have license to talk down to anyone unfortunate enough to be poor and not be able to afford to be dressed up like a doll with pearls sewn onto their jerkins and such. So the rich have a bit of a laugh at the poor for being so poor, is what happens here. But of course they don't know that this ragged, smelly, dirty boy is actually Arya Stark of Winterfell, daughter of Hand of the King. They don't know that. So Arya's like, shit, I don't want to be recognized. I don't want these people to realize it's me, otherwise it'll be a shame on my house and everyone will be upset with me. Sansa will be upset with me, so I'll try not to cause any trouble. But the guards and the scepter and the prince and the princess are like, "Come over here, we need to give you a fucking good spanking for being so poor." And I was like, fuck, I don't want to... And then she makes the impulsive split decision, because the guard's about to grab her, to slip out of his grasp and slide under the scepter's legs and bolt. Arya's done that a few times in the story so far, actually. The way she's dealt with her problems has been to run away at high speed, which is impressive, but not always the best way to deal with our problems in life, is it? But Arya is quite good at it, at least. She runs the fuck away. And in doing so, she accidentally sort of knocks over the prince, Tommen, knocks him onto his plump little rump, which is in itself a dangerous thing to do. As we know well, ragged, dirty, smelly boys are not allowed to damage young princes, or even to knock them onto their plump little rumps. So Arya sprints the fuck out of there, and she knows now that she's really got to make sure that she gets away and isn't recognized, or else there's going to be deep shit. So she runs, and she's pursued, and, by the way, sliding between someone's legs is a move that they often do in fiction. I don't know if it works. I mean, outside of like a basketball court or something, or a smooth surface. Like, I mean, they're doing this on stone. You don't slide on stone like that, do you? If you try and slide, I don't. Anyway, so Arya sprints. Arya's getting a lot of cardio lately, which is also important for a ninja training. All that fast twitch muscle shit. That's what Arya's getting. She's like an Olympic sprinter, but at the sport of cat catching. Wouldn't it be great if chasing cats was an Olympic sport? I would watch the fuck out of that. So Arya runs, and she climbs through a window, and she goes through the maze of the castle, and she goes upstairs and downstairs, all to evade the guards. And she finds herself eventually, she gets kind of turned around and lost, and she ends up in a pitch dark cellar, and it's dark. And she just waits there and hunkers down and sort of waits for the Grand Theft Auto 5 stars to go away, for the cops to stop looking for her, for the Assassin's Creed, for everyone to stop being alert and looking for her. She waits for everything to calm down so she can come back out again. And she reflects while she's waiting there that she used to have bad dreams about the castle, about the Red Keep. She used to have these nightmares of, like, herself wandering through the castle in, like, a nightmarish version of the castle where there's blood from the walls and darkness and no windows, and whenever she calls out, no one answers. Arya is alone in the dark. Which, as a line, sort of summarizes the sort of dark perspective on what Arya's arc is like. She does spend so much time alone in dark situations, so this nightmare could almost be seen as a reflection of the darker side of her arc and her story. It's a tragedy that this girl spends so much time suffering in the dark and alone, and it only really gets worse from here. So that's shit, and then she's like, okay, I've hidden here long enough, it's time to get the fuck out. So she looks around, and she wanders a bit further, and then she's like, holy fuck, I'm hallucinating pictures of monsters, because she sees big empty eyes and big barbed long teeth, and she's like, holy fuck, and she's scared, and she closes her eyes, and she's like, okay, I must have just imagined that. Monsters aren't real. I'm going to open my eyes, and the crazy monsters are going to be gone. But she opens her eyes, and the fucking monsters are still there. But eventually she works out that these are in fact skulls. The skulls of dead dragons, which have been left here in the basement of the Red Keep. Because, Robert Baratheon isn't a big fan of dragons. They used to have these dragon skulls displayed in the Great Hall during the time of the Targaryen kings, but Robert didn't want to have none of that shit, so he dumped the dragon skulls in the basement. You'd think if anywhere they should go to like the Citadel or somewhere, like where they could be studied or at least displayed in a cool way, but alas. At least they weren't destroyed. That would have been really sad. Like fucking Palmyra in Syria or whatever. So Arya checks out the skulls and she's like, yo, these are pretty dope, but also pretty scary. Dragonbone is black, by the way, apparently, which is cool. Also something about having high iron content. I think it's a bit silly when George Martin does sort of have his forays into pretending that Game of Thrones is science and has, like, chemistry. I mean, 99% of the time, George Martin's just like, it's magic, don't think about it. But every now and then he's like, ooh, by the way, dragon glass is obsidian, which is a real mineral thing, so scientific accuracy, TM, I think he should just stick to the magic. Or, well, no, obsidian's a cool word. Anyway, so Arya's sort of looking around, and it's really dark, and so Arya has to use her senses, her Daredevil-enhanced senses, to sort of navigate around the super dark space. She uses her feeling the air, and her sense of smell, and her sense of sound, what do you call that, hearing, in order to navigate, and she repeats some of the sort of mantras that Syrio has given her, that a water dancer sees with all her senses, that fear cuts deeper than swords. And she's wandering around, and eventually she hears noises. Oh shit, someone's coming. So she sort of moves out of the room, and yeah, there's like a well. There's like a deep well with like a staircase going through it, and something is coming up from the bowels of the earth, and there's a light, and she hears two voices having a conversation. And these two voices, we can deduce, are the voices of Varys and Illyrio Mopatis. Varys is wearing one of his disguises that he recently wore with Ned. That disguise, by the way, I think it might be the persona of Rugen, the jailer, because Varys actually, like, keeps up multiple secret identities during his time at the Red Keep. Like, he not only plays the role of Varys, but he also plays the role of Rugen, this turnkey, this worker in the dungeons of the Red Keep. So he's living a sort of double identity Clark Kent type shit, except instead of Superman, he's the Spider, and instead of Clark Kent, he's Rugen the jailer. So it seems as though Varys is wearing his Rugen get up at the moment, and he's hanging out with his good mate, his childhood pal, his buddy guy, Illyrio Mopatis, and they're talking about the politics of Westeros. So they're concerned that the wolf and the lion will soon be at each other's throats. They're concerned that House Lannister and House Stark will soon be fighting. They mention the attempted assassination of Bran Stark, and they speak as though they seem to think that the Lannisters were responsible for Bran's attempted murder, when we know that was actually probably Joffrey. And they're also concerned that Ned Stark is going to work out the truth about the Lannister incest, that Joffrey is not Robert's son. And so they're worried about what Ned might do. And Illyrio is complaining that this is all too soon. We can't deal with this conflict yet. We're not ready for war. Delay. Because, of course, we know that Illyrio has Viserys or Daenerys or young Griff, depending on which iteration of their ever-evolving plan you want to talk about. Of course, this whole conspiracy is something that's covered elsewhere, but basically Illyrio and Varys want to put a Targaryen, or at least an alleged Targaryen, on the Iron Throne. And they don't yet have their shit together, The Dothraki are not yet ready to invade Westeros, nor is Aegon with the Golden Company, so they don't want shit to go down in Westeros just yet, because they want the chaos in Westeros to coincide with their invasion, so it'll be easier to take over. That seems to be their basic plan. And they describe the two men a little bit more. They mention how Illyrio... Yeah, so Illyrio is like morbidly obese, but he walks very lightly on the weight of the balls of his feet. He walks like a water dancer might. And indeed, at Illyrio's manse there is a statue of a water dancer boy, naked, I think, like a painted, realistic statue on like a fountain or something. And it is theorized that that is actually a depiction of a younger Illyrio, because we know that Illyrio actually was Bravo. Yeah, not so much a water dancer, but a Bravo back in the day, which was a kind of ostentatious fighter sort of a bloke. So it's kind of interesting that this merchant and this political conspirator used to be this nimble, light fighter man, and now his profession and his body is rather different. Interesting transformation. Illyrio is an interesting character. But anyway. So they talk a bit about, well, alright, Ned Stark might be a problem, because Ned Stark might escalate the Stark-Lannister conflict, so maybe Ned should die. They actually say if one hand should die, referring to Jon Arryn, why not another? We have danced this dance before, which is interesting. It almost makes it sound as though Illyrio and Varys were behind the killing of Jon Arryn, when we know that the truth is that Jon Arryn was poisoned by Lysa Arryn for Littlefinger. I wonder if maybe when George wrote this first book, he had in mind that Varys and Illyrio did kill Jon Arryn to prevent the incest secret coming out, and maybe even that the Lannisters were responsible for the attempted assassination of Bran. But George Martin later changed his mind and further complicated the story by saying that no, it was actually Lysa Arryn who poisoned Jon, and no, it was actually Joffrey who sent an assassin after Bran. Which is interesting that George Martin would make such dramatic plot changes as he's writing the story. But, you know, he has said a lot that he's a gardener, not an architect. I kind of wish he'd garden quicker. But I don't suppose that's how gardening works. So, talking, they mention Khal Drogo and the princess, which is Daenerys Targaryen. They mention that Khal Drogo doesn't want to send his Dothraki off to war until Daenerys has given birth to his son. And Varys presses a button which opens a secret chamber. We know that Varys knows the secret warrens and passageways and secrets of the Red Keep. And they talk a bit more about some of the other players who are politically relevant. They mention Stannis Baratheon, who is gathering swords, and they mention Loras Tyrell and Renly Baratheon, who are trying to get Marjorie married to Robert, so they're trying to sort of work for sort of Tyrell political gain. And they also mention Ned is this problem, and they also mention Littlefinger. And Varys says, gods only know what game Littlefinger is playing. So it seems as though Varys, for all his insight and all of his spies and all of his genius, honestly doesn't know what the fuck Littlefinger's up to. Which is kind of terrifying, because Varys is probably one of the only people who could have a hope of outsmarting Littlefinger. And they also, so they basically sort of conclude that, well, yeah, okay, so we don't want the war to happen in Westeros too soon, because we've got to let our schemes simmer over in Essos. So Illyrio implores Varys to work his magic a little bit longer. They use this analogy of Varys as a sorcerer to refer to his political and intrigue abilities, which is interesting an analogy to use, given that apparently Varys hates magic because of the sorcerer who cut his cock off when he was a kid. If anything's going to make you hate a profession, I mean, you know, it is it's a bit, you know, discriminate. I mean, if a butcher punched you once, you shouldn't hate all butchers. If a wizard cuts off your balls once, you shouldn't hate all wizards. But I suppose the loss of your balls, I mean, that might make you hate a whole group. Anyway, so they're talking, and one other interesting tidbit is that Varys mentions that he needs more money to buy more sparrows. It sounds as though Illyrio is financing Varys' operations in King's Landing, which makes sense. But Varys mentions that he needs more little birds, which is his euphemism for young spies. And it's mentioned that it's implied that little birds have their tongues cut out, presumably so that they can't blab their secrets to anyone but Varys. They also need to be literate. Which is interesting. Like, whenever Varys talks about, oh, I do it for the realm, and oh, I just want to protect the little children, and Varys does, do things to protect Robert's bastards, and Varys seems like this benevolent protector of the innocent. Mate, he rips the tongues out of children for use in his covert spying operation. Varys is not a good guy. At least if he is, he's a very, very morally grey one. More Walter White than King Arthur. Or whatever the example of moral purity is, I don't know. So the conversation ends. The two men, Illyrio and Varys, leave, leaving Arya going, what the fuck was that? Because Arya has not read the books. She has only read her own chapters. And imagine trying to understand this book from the perspective of only one character. It would be impossible, so no wonder they get into all manner of strife. So Arya goes, alright, fuck, I gotta get out of here. But she's totally lost. She's down deep in the bowels of the Red Keep, so she makes her escape along a sewer. Not entirely unlike how Daenerys gets her men to infiltrate Astapor through the sewer. So she goes out the sewer, and it's gross, and she's feeling scared and afraid, but she pretends that Nymeria is alongside her, and she imagines that Syrio is with her. So all of her mentors and protectors, she imagines being around her, which again is so fucking sad, because Arya is lonely, and Arya wants to have people around her that make her feel safe. She wants a pack. That's a recurring theme throughout her story, but so often she is alone and afraid in the dark. Tragic. So she gets out of the sewer, and she stinks naturally, so she has a little bath in the river, and she's miles outside of the castle. Miles. So she's come a long-ass way. There is a ridiculously complex, fucking tunnel structure, basement stuff going on under the Red Keep, clearly. And so she wanders back to the Red Keep, and she's pretty filthy and damp, but she comes to the guards, and she's like, yo, let me in. And they're like, oh, we're not letting a fucking filthy urchin boy into the Red Keep. What are you talking about? And she's like, I want to see my father. And the guard's like, well, I want to fuck the queen. And they sort of joke with each other. And of course, and so they're being very unpleasant to the urchin boy, Arya. He actually tries to hit her as a man might swat a dog. So again, we're reminded of the shitty class system where the privileged are allowed to just physically assault the young and poor because they're young and poor. And Arya then asserts herself, and she's like, yo, listen the fuck up, I'm Arya Stark of Winterfell, let me in or I'll fucking dibba-dobber you in. I'll have both of your heads on spikes. I am the daughter of Arya Stark, I am the... And then they let her through, which is interesting because it's like you need to be an asshole in order to get shit done sometimes in this system, just like in the real world. Sometimes you just gotta wave your dick around and say, I can have you killed if I want, so do as I say. Sometimes that's the only way to get things done. It's very sad, but class structure means you gotta be a cunt sometimes. Take it from Arya Stark. And eventually she gets taken to her father's room, to Ned Stark, and Ned is very worried about her because Arya's been gone for so long and she's had men searching for her. Septa Mordane is beside herself with fear. She's been praying for a safe return. So yes, Septa Mordane is a bit of a wet blanket on Arya's parade, to mix a metaphor, but Septa Mordane clearly cares very much about Arya, and indeed Ned does say that Septa Mordane is a good woman, don't mess with her too much. And anyway, so Arya tries to warn Ned about all the shit she just saw. She was like, oh, there was like a fucking wizard, and they were talking about a princess, and there was a beard, and like he had a funny hat, and like, so Arya's little child brain, but also a brain that hasn't read the whole book, struggles to explain the significance of what she just saw to Ned. But she did realize that they were talking about killing a hand, and she realized that might threaten Ned, so she's very worried for her father's safety. But Ned's like, what are you talking about, wizards and monsters? This is a child's fantasy. Come on, just chill out. Nonsense. They must have been mummers or something, or your imagination, whatever. And she's like, no, please believe me. Because in a work of fiction, whenever a child comes with a nonsensical warning, it's always true. Always believe the incoherent ramblings of someone who you wouldn't normally believe, because they always turn out to be right. Because, of course, Arya is right that Ned is indeed in great danger. But Ned doesn't listen. And Ned's sort of saying, oh, look, I don't want you to do this running around spying on people's stuff. I don't want you to be chasing cats. I'll have to talk to Syrio Farrell and tell him to tone this shit down, But then there's a knock on the door, and Yoren comes in, the man of the Night's Watch, whose job it is to recruit people to the Watch. And Arya's like, oh shit, you're from the Night's Watch. That's where Jon Snow is, up at Castle Black. And she asks a million questions about Jon Snow. So Arya, this reaffirms Arya's love for Jon and wanting to see him again. Will they ever see each other again? I hope so. They say that different roads sometimes lead to the same castle. But anyway, Arya asks a million questions, but Yoren's like, I'm here to talk to your dad, so let's have an adult conversation. So Arya often has this frustration of being treated like a child, which, of course, sadly she is. And Yoren's like, yeah, I'm here to get men for the Night's Watch, we need more men, and Ned's like, sure, alright, you can talk to the king and maybe get some people out of the dungeons and whatever. They also mention Benjen Stark, and how he's missing. They mentioned that Benjen Stark, his blood runs black, which is a colourful way to say that he's very loyal to the Night's Watch. There's lots of mystery around Benjen, not only around Benjen's disappearance, but around why he joined the Night's Watch, why he's so loyal to the Night's Watch, what he might know about the dangers of the White Walkers, how his leaving might correspond to the events of Robert's Rebellion and the birth of Jon Snow, what Benjen might know about it. Lots of mystery there. Anyway, so they also have more to say. Yoren has further news. Because, of course, Yoren was in the inn when Tyrion Lannister got arrested. So he has come to tell Ned. Ned doesn't know that yet. But before they have that conversation, Arya is ejected from the room because this is big boy talk. And so we don't actually get to see the bit where Yoren tells Ned about the capture of Tyrion. We don't get to see that reaction. But Arya gets taken out of the room, and the guardsman's like, so let's take you to the chambers. And Arya's like, you wouldn't let anyone kill my dad, would you? And he sort of laughs and goes, oh, I'm a guard, I would never allow that. And she's like, yeah, but don't the Lannisters have like twice as many guardsmen as we Starks do? And he's like, yeah, but the Northmen are 10 times better than any non-Northman fighter. And Arya's like, yeah, that's racist, but yeah. And so Arya's very concerned about her father's well-being. And she's like, well, but what if it was, say, a wizard, a big fat wizard with a pointed yellow beard, and a funny eunuch wizard with a funny hat and some stubble? What if a wizard tried to kill Ned? Would you stop him? And the guardsman Desmond is like, well, as far as I know, wizards still die if you chop off their heads, same as any other man. And Arya goes, yes, well, I suppose they do. And that is how the chapter ends. So once again, this chapter, I think, is a good mix of sort of political elements, plot elements, and some character development stuff. Because we get to see the machinations of Varys and Illyrio, which is really cool. One of the only times we see them really talking openly about their own plans. But also we get to learn a lot about Arya, and Arya's arc really starts heading in a direction here. So we get her training and gaining all these skills about stealth and agility and her senses, which feeds in perfectly to her training with a faceless man. But it also explores some of her themes as a person, as a human, which is about like feeling alienated, feeling alone and wanting to be with a pack. But also, I suppose, getting a certain freedom by losing her identity, right? Because when Arya looks like a ragged, dirty boy, she's able to do things that she isn't able to do when she's Arya Stark of Winterfell. But at the same time, being Arya Stark of Winterfell allows her to, get into the Red Keep, past the guards. So it's like identity play, right? There are benefits to wearing different faces, which is, of course, exactly what Arya does when she joins the Faceless Men. So Arya is rapidly preparing for the trials of the future of her arc. She has a lot of suffering ahead of her, but she is making leaps and bounds to prepare herself for what lies ahead. Thank you for listening to this episode of Alt Swift X's Game of Thrones Abridged. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll have another episode for you soon. Cheers.